Fraternal greetings, colleagues, friends, and associates, all those who are attending today's General Assembly of the Fellowship of Christian Councils in Southern Africa. I greet you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. I greet you in the name of solidarity, in the name of peace, in the name of progress, in the name of human rights, and in the name of hope. We indeed must embrace the audacity of hope to confront the problems we face now as a region, but also the problems we confront as a world. I am the least qualified to address you on the occasion of this important General Assembly, but owing to the persuasive skills of the Reverend Dr. Kenneth Mtata, I am here trying to share with you one or two thoughts and ideas about what we should be doing. First of all, to understand the world in which we live. Second, to understand the region that we are part of. And then third, to offer some pathway and some view about what we ought to be doing in order to maximize the opportunity that they may have life and have it abundantly. That is, in fact, our role. I also respect FOCCISA for the role that it has played through its individual member churches, its individual member councils in different countries from years gone by until now. When I became part of this ecumenical movement as a student, it was a time of regional leaders within councils of churches that we looked up to for inspiration, whether it was Reverend Robert Chikanga Kuchera in Zimbabwe, spearheading the council's move towards a platform of constitutional reform in the country, or Reverend Eunice Sowazi in Swaziland, building a platform for demanding justice and inclusion in Swaziland, or Ms. Brigalia Bam in South Africa, leading the council to shape the direction of travel in post-apartheid South Africa, or Reverend Agetile Msomba, ensuring that the Council of Church is part of the authors of a post-one-party state in Tanzania, or Reverend Lucas Amose in Mozambique, who was diligently working to consolidate the possibility of Mozambique harvesting the dividends of peace so that peace is equitably distributed inside that country, or the work that was being done by Reverend Jose Chipenda from Angola, who was leading the All Africa Conference of Churches quite diligently and with vision, or the work that was being done by Reverend Dr. Antoni Nzinga at the Unit 3 Justice, Peace and Creation of the World Council of Churches, which saw him providing support to councils of churches to start such things as election monitoring that were not as familiar and as popular as we see them now, or the work that was being done by the good brother David Modiaga in Botswana, when the Council of Churches was working with civil society to address questions of HIV and AIDS, as well as providing a platform for solidarity for countries that were in crisis within the region. Who will forget the work that was being done by the Namibia Council of Churches at the time of hosting the 22nd Joint Assembly of the ACP EU Joint Assembly, which took place in Windhoek in April 1998. It is important that we acknowledge these historic contributions of the Council of Churches, including that, of course, of the role that played by Reverend Violet Sampabret in Zambia at the time to consolidate the hold of the ecumenical movement in charting a post-one-party state vision for Zambia. So the ecumenical movement has been present in the recent history of our region, but also even during the time of the pitched battles against colonialism. We know the role that was played by groups such as Christian Care in Zimbabwe, which provided solidarity and welfare to families of combatants through proffering scholarships, provision of support, and other things. So the church and the Christian Council formulation of the church is not a stranger to debates about democracy, human rights, governance, economic justice. It's something that we have been doing. I think it is important on this General Assembly to renew that kind of mandate and begin to be more visible again in offering active solidarity with our local populations. What sort of region are we facing today? In fact, what sort of world are we facing today? I argue that today we face a more dangerous world, a less hopeful world, and a world drifting towards a dark age of growing authoritarianism. This authoritarianism is a project where political leaders produced within the confines of a normal election process use political power that they gain from elections to run anti-people projects, anti-human rights projects, and use the state as an instrument for conquest of power and retention of that power. This is a global phenomenon. With its cousin populism, authoritarianism is the worst attack that we have seen on human rights and on ordinary people around the world. Authoritarianism, populism is characterized by scapegoating, is characterized by othering, is characterized by shifting blame on other people. And so we see a consolidation of this project of authoritarianism operating as if it was a global franchise, technical assistance being offered to countries who are being invited to join the League of Authoritarians. Tactics of capture of media, capture of the judiciary, the use of the state as an instrument of political and economic accumulation, the demonization of others have become hallmarks of the world community that we live in. It is important that the Fellowship of Christian Councils of Church first understand this world by sharpening its analysis. Our region of Southern Africa exists within the context of this global community that I have just faced. Our region experiences its own contradictions that normally limit the prospects of all our people harnessing their own creative potential and being able to access opportunities for growth, for care, and for support. Largely because we are a region characterized by contradictions. On the one hand, we want to say that we are one of the richest regions in Africa, rich in natural resources. Almost every wealth of a mineral that you can imagine around the world, you will find it here. Whether it's oil, whether it's diamonds, whether it is gold, whether it is platinum, whether it's lithium, whether it's chrome, whether it's iron, whether it's bauxite. We see daily companies from China mining essence in Nampula. We see the copper of Zambia, the gold of South Africa, and the diamonds of Zimbabwe, the platinum of Zimbabwe, the lithium of DRC, the fish and timber of Mozambique, becoming the most sought after resources. So this region is rich in natural resources, but is unfortunately poor in human development because we are not seeing the proceeds of the sale of these natural resources into human development outcomes for our people. So despite a number of countries in Southern Africa joining the League of Middle-Income Countries, we still see that in the middle-income countries, acute inequalities obtain. Look at the glaring inequalities that stare you in the face when you look at the sprawling wealth of Miramar in Angola versus the squalor of Boa Vista on the other side of town, and Boa Vista means good view in Portuguese. But there's nothing good about the view of Boa Vista. We see this inequality characterized in South Africa through, on the one hand, having Sandton with the richest square mile in Africa, hosting the Africa's largest stock exchange, located side by side with Alexandra, where it is difficult to manage 3 meals a day. We see on the one hand the wealth of Olympia and Windhoek coexisting with the squalor of Katutura. We see Lilai Estates, New Kasama and Lusaka coexisting with George Compound and our compound in the same city. These inequalities that are in income, in class and gender characterized our region. And so whenever we have a pandemic or a problem, pre-existing inequalities amplify the problem rather than conceal it. We also have a region where, while priding ourselves as post-colonial region, we continue to see that Southern Africa remains and retains a colonial fabric in the use, misuse, and non-use of the law, what I call authoritarian legalism. Depending on who you are in a number of our countries, the law will descend on you decisively. Depending on who you are in a number of our countries, the judiciary is willing to play the role of political persecution in the name of prosecution. It offers a vehicle in which the state can persecute ordinary people in the name of prosecution, denying bail, making ridiculous rulings, and turning judges into political activists. We have seen this in a number of our countries. Southern Africa today is a site of the worst excesses of climate change. From Angola in the south facing the worst drought in 40 years, as the people of the Gambos experience the sheer weight of land degradation and corruption and climate conditions that have produced conditions for them, which has created what we now call climate refugees, as people in search of food have migrated into nearby Namibia. In Madagascar, the fourth largest island in the world, we're seeing the worst drought ever felt in that country in 40 years, as the south of the country has become a site of the worst excesses of climate change, with food, malnutrition, and other deprivation of social and human development opportunities becoming the order of the day. Cyclones, floods, and natural disasters characterize yearly occurrences in countries such as Mozambique and Zimbabwe. Mozambique now faces climate-induced debt, as each destruction to its national economy and ecology results in the country having to borrow in order to rebuild. The people who cause climate change, like the people who caused COVID-19, bear less responsibility, and we carry the burden of that. Our analysis of these problems are so vital to our search for solutions of the problems, because as we know, the problems of nowadays cannot be solved by the very logic that created them. And yet that's what we see in some of our regions. We are sitting in a region where elections, far from being peaceful competition for political power, have become life and death moments, in which whole governments devote time, energy, resources, legal power, and capital to create a shrinking of space that produces a choiceless democracy. It is important that we, as a community of faith, ensure that we use the power of theology and faith, of ecumenism, to provide an opportunity in which people come first before markets and profits, in which politics serve people, not the other way around, in which leaders subordinate themselves to the will of God rather than to the will of their own ruling party chefs. It's important that we see ourselves as an actor. The ecumenical movement must see itself as an actor. It is not the first time that we are seeing demands and expectations placed on the doorstep of the church to act. Historically, during the time of colonialism, time of the armed struggle, a number of critical functions and assets of the church were deployed to support the liberation movement. Churches in southern Rhodesia constituted what was called Christian care to support families of combatants with welfare. This was not the only country where that happens. The South African Christian Council of Churches was actually accused of being the ANC at prayer because it took a radical position against apartheid. The Christian Council of Zambia was instrumental in participating in building platforms that fought against the one-party state. Who can forget the role of the Christian Council of Tanzania under the leadership of Reverend Angetile Msomba, and the role that the church there played in promoting frontiers of justice? Who forget the role that Reverend Lucas Amos in Mozambique played together with the Christian Council of Mozambique to consolidate the platform of peace, so that peace was not just the absence of gunfire, but the presence of justice. Don't forget the role that was played by Reverend Rombezi Chikanga Kuchera in Zimbabwe, when the Zimbabwe Council of Churches became the birthplace of the largest constitutional movement or constitutional reform movement. We'll forget the role that we have seen the Christian Council of Botswana tackle decisively the impact of HIV in that country, or the role played by Reverend Eunice Sowazi of Swaziland when she led as Secretary General the beginning of a conversation on justice and equity in that country. Today, we are able to confront the different manifestations of this crisis, and we see a church that is in retreat. When we know that it was at the center of building some of the largest social justice movements. It was at a meeting on the 7th of July 1998 in Harare that the Reverend Molefe Tsele Tendai Nyawoda, the director of FOCCISA, together with Mr. Tawanda Mtasa and Deprose Muchena from Zimbabwe Council of Churches, met to discuss the importance of building a platform within the churches that would advance economic justice. That led to the creation of the Economic Justice Network of FOCCISA that we now see operating in Cape Town, and its founding director, Malcolm Damon, was at that meeting in Harare. At the time, he was the Public Policy Officer of the South African Council of Churches, working closely in Parliament or with Parliament in Cape Town. So we've created moments of regional integration of people in the past that should allow us now to reflect on the regional integration of the future. It is for me an opportunity to restate the obvious, that FOCCISA, for it to be able to be seen as a relevant actor in this region, must challenge our governments to build a regional integration project of people, not of profits and markets. Capital in Southern Africa is freedom of movement. People do not have freedom of movement. It is time to challenge Southern African governments to become governments of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is time for Southern African governments to demonstrate to us, through our example and effort of advocacy, that they are not part of the global authoritarian project that I described earlier. We see a region other than the pockets and islands of peace and progress that really has become a region of chaos. Governments presiding over the West energy crisis. Governments presiding over closure of civic space with NGO bills of all types of variants being proposed in one country after the other. Governments that are interested in weaponizing fear, harvesting fear as an instrument of repression. Governments that are undermining institutions of government, subordinating institutions to personal rule, turning judiciaries into sites of persecution, turning executive bureaucracies into sites of corruption, and parliaments into a place where rules are passing through parliament instead of being passed by parliament. Institutional debauchery and undermining of institutions is a regional phenomenon which we must confront. A region in which governments are exploiting religion in order to achieve political ends, and religious leaders that are acquiescing to that project. A region where in some of our countries, outsiders are targeted as an explanation for policy failure and policy paralysis. A region where some are rewriting history, ensuring that history is retold, what they call patriotic history. An exercise of placing yourself at critical moments of history in order to justify your present circumstance of accumulation and looting. A region in which some of our governments are exercising the long-old tactic of divide and rule, pitting citizens against each other, spending so many resources investing in division of the people rather than the unity of the people. And a region where the truth is being eroded. 1 + 1 is no longer 2, it is 11. We cannot exist side by side with this emerging project of authoritarianism. It is important, therefore, that the Church in Southern Africa, through the leadership of FOCCISA, re-examines its mission and ask itself some questions in order to determine whether it is fit for purpose. And I propose about 3 or 4 questions that we must ask as we begin this General Assembly. The first is, what has been the responsibility of the Church? What has been the role of the Church today? Historically, what has been the role of the Church in the face of political, economic, and social disorder? 2, is the Church speaking with one voice? Is it able to speak with one voice? What does it take to speak with one voice? What are the principles, the theological background and bedrock around which the Church could speak with one voice to tackle the problems I have characterized? 3, is the Church willing to take risks associated with prophetic ministry? How many of the church leaders are willing to say, "You are the man," as Nathan said, pointing at David? 4, our vision of regional integration, how does it look like? What do we put first in defining this regional integration project? To what extent can we ensure that the frontiers of regional integration are designed on the possibility of giving abundant life to all? 5, is the Church able to offer a place for solidarity for the poor, for victims of political violence, for victims of gender-based violence, for victims of capitalism and globalization? Is the Church able to offer that? These questions raise the important rallying call of leadership that we believe FOCCISA can provide. Leadership not being an exercise of authority or opposition, but the ability to influence progressive outcomes through the work of others. Can we deploy the arsenal of influence, the soft power of the Church, to generate outcomes that look like the world that we want to live in? What leadership are we exercising when our region is facing the prospects and possibility of being a laughingstock, where electricity comes once in a day, and when it comes back, the celebration is like the one we have at weddings, that the electricity is back? We are presiding over the worst energy crisis. Where is the truth being told of the root cause of the energy crisis? A migration crisis that is creating tensions in receiving countries. But when the opportunity to address root causes is available, we see very limited capacity and confidence and courage to call a spade a spade. Where is the Church when that is happening? The prospects of war continue to loom in the horizon, Cabo Delgado being an ugly scene of the region. We haven't seen effective and solid display of courage and leadership to tackle the root cause of that war and the solutions that were needed. It is time that we don't look the other way, but that we meet the invitation that people of the region are giving to the Church to provide the leadership at a time when governments are failing, to provide hope at a time when institutions are failing, to expand civic space at a time when civic space is closing, to build inclusive economies of care when profits are being pursued relentlessly, and to ensure that we have the audacity of hope being a guiding principle for the sake of abundant life.